Well, welcome to Axiom Church. Again, we're so glad to have you. My name is Jeremy. I'm part of the teaching team here. And before we get into Jonah, where we're going, I just want to acknowledge what this weekend is. It's a really great weekend because it's a weekend where we're all off work tomorrow, and we have a lot of fun, and we grill hamburgers, and we hang by the pool, or whatever other shenanigans you might do on Memorial Day. But it's a day where we are just really grateful for the people who have served our country, specifically those who have died serving our country, and we celebrate that with our family and friends. And there's a lot of us that are grateful, and then I just want to acknowledge there are those of us perhaps that have been connected to a family or friend who has served and has given their life. So we can gather here today in this place so we can explore faith, so we can even sing these songs together without fear of what might happen as is happening in so many other parts of the world. And so I just want to begin by acknowledging that that is true. It's a little bit of a mixture for some of us probably, but if you guys would join me, we just have a moment of silence, and even just I'll pray for us in a second as we just acknowledge that, there are those that have served for our country, allow us to be here today. Heavenly Father, we thank you so much that we just have the opportunity to be here together and to talk about you with our kids and our families. And God, but we just know that for many it's come at a cost. For all of us it's come at a cost. And you are not just the God of our country, you're the God of the world. And Father, we just thank you so much that you've blessed us to be in a place where we get to be together and learn about you together. So would you be with us in this time? And then would you be a source of comfort to those who this weekend, tomorrow specifically, is just a reminder of a lot of loss? And then would you allow all of us just to live from a place of gratitude in the midst of all the things we've got planned? In Jesus' name, amen. Well, we're going to pivot and jump right into Jonah now, and I want to begin it by sharing a little bit of a little piece of my journey. Early on in my marriage, my wife and I, we were saving for a house, and to do this, we lived in a little 300 square foot guest house in my parents' backyard for about a year in order to save up to buy our first house. And this little guest house, it had a curtain for a bathroom door. It had an Instant Pot for a kitchen. And so as you can imagine, it grew our marriage quite a bit. Not only this, but did I mention it was in my parents' backyard? So that alone would grow our marriage quite a bit. But when we finally saved up enough money to buy our first house, we were moving in and we're unpacking all of our stuff from our old apartment. And we begin opening the drawers in the kitchen, and then we realize that we don't have a drawer that looks like this in this picture right here. We don't have like a wide drawer. All we had were these skinny, tiny drawers. And so we had this big silverware thing, and we had no place to put it. And so what we ended up doing, suffering in our 1,200 square foot mansion of a house, is we went and bought one of these, and we put all of our silverware in this little organizer right here, and we put it right on the table. And it was great. It was totally fine. Like, we were so grateful for the house. But then fast forward a couple of years later, for a lot of reasons, we moved into a new house, the house we're currently in today. And when we walked through it for the first time, you know that we were checking in the kitchen and looking all around at the drawers because it had multiple big, wide options for these silverware things to go. And so we moved in. We were so excited about that. Talk about like upgrades and amenities, right? Like, some people want a pool, but we were good with this like wide drawer thing that we had. We're stoked about it. But we move in. And 6 months later, we have some friends over, we're grilling, and they're kind of starting to do that awkward dance where they're going around the kitchen and they're like opening drawers trying to find the silverware, and they're too embarrassed to ask where it is. Does anybody else do that? Is that just me? All right, me and her are the only ones that do that. That's really good to know. It's comforting. So anyways, they were doing that dance, and they finally said, "Where's your silverware?" And embarrassingly, we lived in this house for 6 months. I go over into my pantry, and I pull this thing off the top shelf of my pantry, and I go put it on the table. And I just laugh at myself doing it because I realized, we didn't need to live with this thing anymore, but it had been how we had been operating, and so we just brought it into this new season of life. Why do I start that way? Because for a lot of us, when it comes to approaching God, when it comes to the idea of a relationship with God, I think many of us are holding on to kind of these old ways of thinking and relating to and thinking about ourselves, thinking about life as a whole. And that is whether you are a follower of Jesus, you've been following Jesus for years, you're brand new, or you're not even sure what to believe. I believe there's a different way of relating to God that is available to all of us today, continues to be available to us, even if we've been following Jesus for years. And I want to talk about exactly what that is today in our time together. We began last week reading Jonah 1, and we're going through the entire book of Jonah over 4 weeks, kind of as a study on how we read the Bible, but also just looking at the different ways that the book of Jonah applies to our life. It was written about 800 BC by a prophet named Jonah. A prophet is a person who speaks on behalf of God to other people. That was what his role was, his career in life. And Jonah is this book it's a combination of a lot of things. It's kind of metaphorical narrative, historical narrative, it's poetry, it's satire. But what it is most famous for, as you might have heard of it before, is Jonah and the what? The whale, right? And that's what we're gonna look at today. But before we get there, I want to catch you up. And if we're to summarize the entire book of Jonah in one sentence, it would say something like this right here. Pastor Joby Martin says this so well. The book of Jonah is ultimately God's relentless pursuit of a rebellious people through this reluctant missionary. And I'm a sucker for a really good alliteration, so I love that. Relentless pursuit, rebellious people, reluctant missionary. Jonah was reluctant because God came to him one day and said, hey, I want you to go and preach to the Ninevites. And just to put this into context for us, I want you to think about that person in your life that you really don't like. Like just that person. Like if they came to mind instantly, that's the one. It could be an old boss, it could be a coworker, it could be a neighbor, it could be a family friend that just drives you crazy because they're so set in their ways, or that dude that gives you the ick, like whatever it might be. I want you to think of that person and imagine God coming to you one day and saying, hey, I want you to go invest your life into showing them radical love. Like the feeling you get, it's probably like heck no, right? Or some other colorful word you might use that I shouldn't say up here. That's probably the word, what comes to mind for you. You're like, no, I'm not going to do that. This is exactly what Jonah felt, times 1,000. Because the Ninevites, where God said go preach, Nineveh was the capital of Assyria. The Assyrian people are widely known as one of the most genocidal nations in history. They were truly a terrorist group. And not only this, but that they had been a terrorist group to Jonah's people, the Israelites. And so when God says go preach to Jonah, Jonah's like, no way. And he runs the opposite direction. He gets on a boat with all these sailors, and then God chases him down with this storm. And then it's just, they kind of bicker about it for a little bit. They realize he's a prophet, he's a man from God, and then they kind of turn to God even though they were pagan, and all this stuff happens. And finally Jonah's like, you know what? I'll save you guys. Just throw me in the water. They don't want to do it. But eventually they decide to throw him in the water. And that's where at the end of chapter 1 it says, then God provided a fish to swallow up Jonah and save his life. And before we move on to what happens next in the story, I just want to acknowledge two things. One, if you're new to church or Christianity, and perhaps you hear about the whale swallowing up a man to save his life, I can understand if that feels a little far-fetched to you. I didn't grow up in church, and so it does to me as well sometimes when I think about these stories. But in the most simplest form possible, this could be a whole message in and of itself. Let me just tell you why I don't discount it at face value. Because if there was a man in history who predicted his own death and resurrection, and he pulled it off, and there's all this historical evidence to support that it actually happened, then for me personally, I go with what he says, to put it as simply as I can. And this man not only performed this miracle, he performed a lot of miracles, which means miracles, things that defy scientific understanding and odds, that those are possible. And not only this, but this man also talked about Jonah one time, and he affirmed the Old Testament scriptures. And so because of Jesus, I can take that this whale thing, this actually might have happened. But for those of you who perhaps that still feels a little stretched to you, then I would just say you don't have to throw out the entire story of Christianity if you struggle with the story of the whale. Because the entire thing does not hinge on whether or not the whale and Jonah actually happened. The entire thing hinges upon who Jesus was and whether or not he rose from the dead. And so you don't have to throw out the proverbial baby with the bathwater here, and I just want you to keep that in mind as we read this together, depending on what kind of faith background you're bringing in. The second thing I want to call out before we read into chapter 2 here is that while this is a story about what's happening with the whale, and that's really exciting and fun, it is so much more about what is happening in Jonah's heart. Because he could have been on that boat and he could have just said, you know what, God, you're right. Guys, go ahead and turn the boat around. We're going back. Or he could have got on his knees and said, God, I'm so sorry. But he still chooses to disobey God by choosing death over turning and going the other direction. He says, hey, throw me in the water. Anything is better. Death is better than having to go to those Ninevites. And so he's rebelling in his heart. And God knows this. And God is still pursuing him, inviting him to let go of this old way of approaching God and step into something new, the same way God is inviting all of us to do that today. And then here's what we read next in Jonah chapter 2, verse 1. It says this. It says, then Jonah prayed to the Lord his God from inside the fish. This moment here in Jonah's life, it makes me think of my boys. I have 3 boys. They're 4 and under. And, one of the things that I've come to realize is there are 2 questions I hear most often from my boys. The first question is, can I have a snack? Even the baby, grunts at me, and I'm like, I think he wants a snack. And for some of us, that might still be the most common question of our life is, can I have a snack, right? And the second question I hear most often is, can we wrestle? They love to wrestle. And I'm just seeing the next, 18 years of my life is constant WrestleMania. And what ends up happening is I get off work and they just start attacking me pretty much. And they turn feral because they're little boys and they start biting and poking and scratching and all of this. And I'm like, oh, it's not going to happen. And so I put them in full Nelsons just to protect myself, basically. These little tiny humans in full Nelsons, stop, quit it. But they end up giving up. I think what's happening here in Jonah's life, you see, God is pursuing him and he loves him, but in this pursuit at this point, he kind of has Jonah in a full Nelson here because Jonah has been running and running and running. All manners of running externally are now inhibited, though, because he's caught in this whale, and so he begins to address what is going on in here, and that's why he begins to pray. And then we can see this is happening when we read his prayer. He says, I cried out to the Lord in my great trouble, and he answered me. I called to you from the land of the dead, and Lord, you heard me. You threw me into the ocean depths, and I sank down to the heart of the sea. The mighty waters engulfed me. I was buried beneath your wild and stormy waves. Then I said, O Lord, you have driven me from your presence, yet I will look once more toward your holy temple. And he's having this moment of sobriety here. And notice that word sank that we just read, because it pops up 3 times in this prayer. Look right here. It says, I sank beneath the waves, and the waters closed over me. Seaweed wrapped itself around my head. I sank down to the very roots of the mountains. Scholars call this the descension. It's where he is descending down 3 times, time after time after time, down into this rock bottom, both spiritually, physically, mentally, emotionally, all of it. He is descending down to rock bottom. He says, I was imprisoned in the earth, whose gates locked shut forever. But then he continues, he says, but you, O Lord, my God, snatched me from the jaws of death, referencing the whale swallowing him up, saving him. As my life was slipping away now, I remembered the Lord, and my earnest prayer went out to you in your holy temple. Those who worship false gods turn their backs on all of God's mercies. While I know that Jonah's external circumstances might not be very relatable to us, because most of us would not live to tell the tale if this happened, I believe what is going on the inside is very relatable. Because have you ever found yourself in some sort of rock bottom moment before? Have you ever found yourself in circumstances where you don't know what to do, where you feel helpless to what has happened in life? Perhaps a series of choices, the ramifications of those choices have caught up to you. You experience consequences in your life, or maybe the consequences of somebody else's choices have left you stuck, unsure of what to do in life. Or maybe for you, it's not so much, it's this big thing that's happened, but if you're honest, when you think about your life, you're just like, I didn't know how I ended up here. Is this really all that it's come to? Or you look in the mirror one day and you think, is this really all that I am? Maybe you don't like the person that looks back at you, and that's what your rock bottom becomes certain days. I think rock bottom looks different for all of us and varies by different degrees of intensity, but what is a common denominator amongst all of our lives is there are certain situations that put us in a position where we feel helpless, where we literally don't know what to do, we are lost. And in these moments, we are humbled because we recognize that maybe we're not in control to the extent that we thought we were. And this is exactly where Jonah is, and it's why he says, I remember something. I remembered the Lord. I remembered who God is, his faithfulness in my life. And it's why he says this next. He says, but I will offer sacrifices to you as songs of praise, and I will fulfill all my vows, for my salvation comes from. And I want to pause here for just a moment. Because what happens next in this sentence, and how he finishes this sentence, is not only integral to his life, but it's so integral to our lives and how we approach God, and even the old things that we bring when there is a new option available to us. The word salvation there, where he says, my salvation comes from, the word salvation has two different meanings in the Hebrew language, two different layers to it. One is a far more existential and spiritual sense. How does one make sense of the broken world we live in today? Is rock bottom actually the end? Where does meaning and purpose come from? Where does the good life come from? How do I fix my own broken life that I have perhaps created or somebody else has created for me? That's one side of this word salvation. The other side of this word salvation can also be translated more literally. It's help or rescue, or it is something that brings you out of a precarious circumstance back into safety. And I know we're probably at different places when we read a word salvation like that. Given we're all in different places in our faith, we might be at different places into what that word means to us, and that's okay. Wherever you are is good. But just for a moment, when you think about your own life, let me ask you, how would you complete this sentence right here? For my salvation comes from, fill in the blank. How would you complete that sentence? Another way of thinking about it is, where do you turn to when you feel overwhelmed or you hit rock bottom? How do you try to solve the problems in your life? In a deeper sense, where do you find purpose? Where do you seek out the good life? Where do you seek out happiness? And especially for the Christians in this room, it'd be easy to be like, Jesus, right? We're in church. We all want to say that. We know that's the right answer. Spoiler alert, we're going to get there eventually. But the question, the fill in the blank here, is not so much about the right word and what you would say in your mind. It's about what your life says. What does your disposition say? What do your reactions to various things in your life say? What do your words say, your deepest inner thoughts in your heart say in terms of what you believe about where salvation, and whatever that word means to you, what you believe about where that word comes from? I think there's a handful of things our lives might be saying at times. We might say, my salvation comes from circumstances changing. That's going to make me okay on the inside when this circumstance change, or getting this person to change, or achieving the American dream in some sense, or maybe it's a certain level of financial security, or a certain number of likes, or it is status, or success, or maximizing comfort, or minimizing hard things and painful things in our life, or maintaining or regaining some sense of control. All of those answers to this are very understandable and justified. However, when we ask, well, why do we feel that way? And why do we think that? And why is that our answer? And we kind of dig it back layer by layer by layer. I believe there's two primary answers that we have as humans. We see these two answers in the Bible. We see them in Jonah's life as well. And these two answers are, one, my salvation comes from me, to work my way out of this, to right the ship of my own life by my own willpower or effort. It's up to me to build a life with my own hands that gives me some sense of comfort or control or security or happiness. Or the second answer being, I'm not salvageable. I'm too far gone. I'm hopeless. This is just what life is. This is just who I am. We see both of these answers show up about 800 years later, when Jesus is sharing a parable, one of the most famous parables in the entire New Testament, called the prodigal son. And many people actually tie the story of the prodigal son back to who Jonah is in his life. Some people call Jonah the prodigal prophet because of the story of the prodigal son. And some of you might know it, but I just want to summarize the story for us to bring to light how this connects to where we're going today. One day, Jesus is talking to some people, and he says to the people in some way, he says, this is what God is like. Which should cause all of us to perk up and go, okay, what is God like, right? And then he launches into a parable, which is a made-up story to make a point. And he says, there was a father who had two sons. And the younger son comes to his father one day and says, Father, can I have my inheritance? Which we read that and doesn't mean much to us today perhaps, but back then what that was essentially saying is, hey, you're dead to me. Our relationship is dead to me. This family is dead to me. I just want your money and I just want your stuff. That's what that was saying. And the father surprisingly says, okay. He gives him the inheritance. The younger son goes off and lives his life in wild extravagance and sin. But then he runs out of money. A famine hits the land, and he finds himself working as a servant in a pig pen. And he's so hungry that he is envious of the food that the pigs have. I mean, this is a rock bottom moment. He believes himself to be unsalvageable here. But he thinks to himself, you know what, maybe I can at least be a servant in my father's household. That would be better than this. I don't deserve much, but maybe I can have that. And so he goes back to his father's land, and the text says, Jesus says, while he was a long way off, which is one of the most powerful, I think, sentences in the entire Bible about what it says about God. It says the father runs to his son, throws his arms around him, puts a ring on his finger, sandals on his feet, a robe over his back. All were symbols of my son, not this servant, not this person who had left, but you are a member of the family still, and nothing you could ever do could change that. And then the father says, go kill the fattened calf. We're going to have a feast. We're having steak. It would have been the equivalent of somebody being like, hey, you know that new Brazilian steakhouse on 183 called Estancia? We're renting the whole place out. We're having a party, right? That's what the father does. And then we hear about the elder brother. The party's happening, and the elder brother's outside the house, and he's grumbling. He's so angry. He's upset. He's thinking to himself, you know what? I've been here the whole time. I've done everything right. And my dad's not even taken me for brunch at Estancia before, nonetheless renting the place out. And he's so angry. He's bitter. He's upset. And the father comes out, and he asks his son to come into the party, but the son refuses. And that's where the parable ends. It's an incredible story. It says so much about God. But what we see are these two answers to the question of where does salvation come from pop up in the postures of these two brothers here. The younger has the posture of, I'm too far gone, I can't be saved. He believes he deserves nothing. The elder brother says, I save myself. He's followed the rules, he's done it right. He believes he earns acceptance from his father. I don't know about you, but for me personally, I deeply resonate with the elder brother. And that is because for me in my life, there were a set of circumstances growing up that made things feel a little out of control. And so unknowingly at a young age, I vowed to myself, I will always be somebody who has my life together. And I said this to myself because I saw what happened when you didn't, and it didn't look very fun. And so I will always be somebody that has my life together, and I didn't know it, but I situated my self-worth, my emotional well-being, and my happiness, and my ability to be right and good in all the different areas of my life. As you might predict, at some point, I began to recognize I don't have it all together. Not only did becoming a dad make this very apparent, marriage making this very apparent, but certain life circumstances just squeezed me in such a way that it's almost like my fear and avoidance of rock bottom became a rock bottom in and of itself. And in recognizing this, I began to see all the areas in which I'd been trying to be right. But most of the time, even in my life today, as I'm still figuring this out, I try to be right, but it is most often for the wrong reasons. It is not out of love and joy and peace. It is out of pride and fear and control. This is the heart of the elder brother. I don't know which one resonates with you the most, where you might see yourself in those different postures, or maybe somewhere in between. Maybe it's not as black and white for you. But to bring it full circle and connect all these dots together, what Jonah's life is showing us and what the parable of the prodigal son reinforces is that both postures miss the heart of God. Because both postures are carrying around this silverware organizer, this old way of thinking about life, essentially because both postures are trying to relate to God based on what we do and what we don't do. One posture is shame-based, saying, I've done too much, I'm unworthy, I can't be loved. The other posture is pride-based, saying, well, I'm all good, I'm so good, God must be so happy with me. Or even not even that, but even just saying, well, I don't need God. I mean, in suburbia here, we've got our cars and our houses and things, and so many of us, our life is so put together on the outside that we can avoid needing God for so long, but if you live long enough, then you eventually know that, well, you don't got it as much, because something relationally, financially, circumstantially comes up, and it makes you recognize you're not in control. You can't keep it together the way that you thought that you could. Both postures miss the heart of God. And Jonah is seeing the heart of God in the whale right here, in the same way that we see the heart of God in the story of the father extending compassion to both the younger son, but also he goes out of the party asking the older brother to come in. He extends compassion to the elder brother as well. All of these pointed to the fact that we cannot save ourselves on our own. It is not based on what we do. But we're also not too far gone at any point in our life, as we see in the story of the prodigal son. No, Jonah finishes the sentence in this prayer as you might have predicted. He says, "For my salvation comes from the Lord alone." The Lord alone, not what I do or don't do. The Lord alone. And we might think to ourselves, oh, that's just a nice little sentence in there in the book of Jonah, down descending into the depths of the oceans. But scholars actually point to this verse in the Bible, in the book of Jonah, in the whale, as many scholars say, it is the central verse to the entire Bible. It summarizes what the whole thing is all about. Salvation is found in the Lord alone. It's the conclusion of his prayer. We read next that, "And the Lord ordered the fish to spit Jonah out onto the beach." But I want to pause and sit with that sentence just a little bit longer here. Fast forward 800 years, you have the Apostle Paul writing a letter to the early Ephesian church. And the Apostle Paul was an elder brother too. I mean, he said, he knew it all. He's like, I'm the worst of the worst. And this is what he writes about salvation. He says, "For it is by grace you have been saved." By grace you have been saved. Notice that. This is through faith, and this is not from yourselves, not what you do or don't do. It is purely the gift of God, not by works, so that no one can boast. We've heard that song, Amazing Grace. We hear that word, especially in Christian circles, get thrown out a lot. But I believe, because I see this in myself, that we so often discount just how radical and scandalous grace actually is. I once heard grace explained this way. It's not a perfect analogy, but I think it's helpful. Just imagine for me with the moment that I go out, and while you guys are here, they're singing the last song, I steal your car, okay? If I did that, I'd probably get caught. I'm not very good of a thief, okay? But let's say I steal your car, you catch me, and there's a couple different ways that you could respond in that moment. One would be punishment and justice, which would be there's a fine, there's a sentence, you press charges. That's punishment and justice. Another thing you could do is you catch me, I'm caught, it's plain as day, but you're like, you know what? You said some good things today. I'm going to let you off, a hook. And you extend forgiveness and mercy. You have mercy. I'm not going to press charges, but I want my car back. The third option would be grace. And it's where you catch me and, you say, you know what? I got a second set of keys. Car's yours. And actually, wait, swing it by my house later. I'm going to detail it personally. And you know what? We're having steaks that night. Do you want to come over for dinner? I'm going to invite my whole family and friends. That's what grace does. It is paradoxical. It flips our understanding of right and wrong in a way, because grace is both undeserved by those who think they don't deserve it, and it is unearned by those who think that they can earn it by some amount of good or being right. This is exactly what is extended to us as Jonah unknowingly foreshadows in his prayer, because, again, 800 years later, a man named Jesus hung on a Roman cross, and he lived a perfect life that none of us could live. And he did this, he died for us to satisfy the justice of God, because in our sin, our wrongness, there's a gap between us and God, and because God is perfect, it means there must be something to pay the penalty, because he must be perfectly just as well. And so when Jesus dies, he pays the penalty for our wrongdoing, our sin. And in doing so, in that moment, not only are we extended mercy and forgiveness and that our penalty is canceled, but we are also extended grace, friendship, relationship with the God of the universe, if we are to trust and believe that is true. This is the grace Jonah recognizes in the whale. It's the grace that the Ninevites eventually experience. And Jonah, he still gets upset about this later on. This is a moment of sobriety, but we're going to read, he still gets all bent out of shape later on. But this is also the grace that we are offered today. However, if you're anything like me, isn't it true that many of us might think to ourselves, that's too good to be true? Like, where's the catch, right? Or maybe we think, well, yeah, grace, that's a nice Christian word, but I don't really care about that. I still want to approach life, prove myself, find my worth and status based on what I do. That we hear about this idea of grace, and yet we continue to live our lives in such a way, approaching God in such a way, that it's all based on what we do. We think of ourselves, we look at ourselves in the mirror each morning, and we feel about ourselves based on what we do. And I think we do this for a number of reasons. A culture that emphasizes works, success, likes, and status. A societal narrative that's ingrained in us that promises happiness based on a good set of circumstances. A childhood that carries with it messages of acceptance or non-acceptance based on behavior or performance. Or maybe you're like me, some kind of wounding or pain experience that you make a vow to yourself and live your life in such a way to that vow that it is based on what you do. And either we believe that we're not worthy of God and we say things like, I'm going to walk in the church and the whole building's going to burn down because we have so much shame about what we've done and we could never be loved, right? Even Christians in here, we have the same message playing over and over and over again when we mess up or we do that thing and we beat ourselves up for it. Or, worse off, in my opinion, if you're like me, you judge other people like this. And you think to yourself, well, I read my Bible and I go to church and I pray each morning and I'm so good and God must be so happy with me and I've got the right political party and I'm so glad I'm not like those people over there. We're going to talk about those people a little bit more next week, but we're just so happy with ourselves and we entitle that God must be happy too because of what we do. Again, both postures miss the heart of God. I love how one of my favorite authors, his name is Brennan Manning, I reference him far too much, but he was once a priest and then an alcoholic and then a priest. And he says it like this: when we wallow in guilt and remorse and shame over real or imagined sins of the past, we are disdaining the gift of God's grace. Grace tells us that we are accepted just as we are, warts and all. No matter how hard we try, we can't earn it. It is given to us. And then he continues. He says, we may not be the kind of people we want to be. We may be a long way from our goals. We may have more failures than achievements. We may not be wealthy or powerful or spiritual. We may not even be happy. We are nonetheless accepted by God, held in his hands. Such is his promise to us in Jesus Christ, and that's so important. God did extend free grace to us, but it cost him something of infinite value. His very own son, a piece of himself. It's freely given, but it cost him. That's why it says in Jesus Christ. It is a promise that we can trust. The challenge today is to trust and to let go of whatever old way of approaching God based on what we do, and instead to surrender that mentality, to begin to trust and begin to receive God's grace in our life. Question I want to ask you as you think about your own life and what this looks like for you. What's keeping you? However you answer that question of where salvation comes from, what's keeping you from receiving God's grace in your life? What is holding on to you, or what are you holding on to? What narrative or message is causing you to keep your fists closed and your life continuing to try to earn favor with God or earn favor with yourself? What silverware organizer have you been holding on to when it is no longer necessary because it's been paid in full? And the second question is, what would need to happen for you to receive his grace? What thing might you need to let go of? Or what work might you need to do internally? Where you might need to go in the past in order to move forward, actually, and not live stuck in the past. This is one of those messages that's so hard to get really practical with, because the whole point is that it's not based on what we do. It's about digging deep to these answers of these questions of what is keeping us from this grace that is freely offered to us. But I believe one of the things that we can do practically to begin to experience this grace is just to wake up each day, and whatever this looks like for you, and just begin to pray this prayer: God, help me to receive your grace today. God, help me to receive your grace today. Help me to let go of that way of thinking. Help me to think differently about myself, about my life, about those people, about you, perhaps. Help me to receive your grace today. And it's not like you're going to do that once, and then all of a sudden you're just going to live and operate totally different in the world. But as you do this over and over again, something begins to peel apart. Some kind of inner transformation begins to occur where you begin to let go of doing it based on what you do. And you begin to live a life of love, peace, and joy rooted in Christ. I'll end with this. My wife and I, we recently celebrated our 10th anniversary, and we went to Oregon. Thank you. Feels like a win for her, right? She made it. She made it 10 years with me. But we went to Oregon, and I was sitting up on this cliff right here, and this is a picture I took in this moment. And I was sitting there on this picnic bench, and I was just kind of thinking about all the things that were going on in life. As often happens when we're in a beautiful place, we have a hard time enjoying the beautiful place if you're anything like me. And I was thinking about all these things that were going on, what was good, what was not good, what was undone I needed to do. But what kept happening is my mind kept getting pulled back to the waves that were hitting the shore, cliff below. And the sound was hitting me over and over again. And then anxiety would come in really quickly. And all of a sudden, I'd be thinking about all these other things in my life again, what needs to be done, where we're kind of in this liminal space in life. We're not sure where God's leading us, all this kind of stuff. And then I'd get pulled back to the waves again. And this realization that wherever I am in life, like in this moment right now, these waves are hitting that shore at this very moment. Just wave after wave after wave. And I began to think, perhaps this is what God's grace is like. That as I move in and out of life, and I do it based on what I do, and then I remember, God, it's not based on what I do. It's all found in you and what Jesus did for me, and then I step back out of that, and I step back into it again. It's almost just like it's wave after wave after wave after wave of his grace. Moment after moment, day after day. A grace that is saying to each of us today, I love you. There's nothing you could do to make me love you less or more. I love you just as you are. A grace that is saying, you might feel helpless, but I'm right here with you. A grace that is saying, I know that's so hard. I see the pain you're in. But it's okay. I'm with you in that pain. You're not alone. A grace that is saying, inviting you to walk with, step with him every single day. This is the grace we're all offered. And I believe if we can open up our hands to receive it, to recognize it does come from the Lord alone, we can begin to experience these waves getting louder and louder in our life, and other things getting a little smaller, a little smaller, a little smaller. And so I want to end just a little differently today as we get close to wrapping up here. And if you're comfortable, you don't have to do this, but I would just invite you to close your eyes for a moment. Close your eyes if you're comfortable, and listen to these waves. And perhaps it takes you to a memory being on a beach, hopefully not a Texas beach. Or maybe you smell the salt, you hear the waves, you feel a cool breeze. And then would you just imagine for a moment that each wave is another extension of God's grace to you? What's keeping you from that grace? And what might need to happen in your life for you to receive God's grace, maybe here for the very first time even? However you're wrestling with this, however you feel towards yourself or towards God, these waves will continue to go even past this moment. But just sit with those for a moment.